They call me Mr. Tibbs. In the Heat of the Night wasn't just a whodunit police drama, it was a cinematic earthquake that cracked open America's cultural fault lines. Behind the taut mystery of a black detective and a white sheriff was a production riddled with real danger, tense standoffs, and choices so bold they nearly killed the film before it ever reached theaters. What audiences saw was polished. Sidney Poitier standing tall, Rod Steiger brooding, Ray Charles singing fire into Quincy Jones's score. But what happened off camera? Chaos. Studio executives panicked, southern towns seethed, and actors fought to protect their dignity in a racially divided America. Today, we're exposing 12 wild facts about In the Heat of the Night that reveal just how risky, raw, and revolutionary this film really was. And wait for the bonus fact. It's a moment so unscripted and defiant that it still stuns Hollywood historians. Let's begin. Sidney Poitier refused to film in the Deep South. When Norman Jewison scouted Mississippi locations, Sidney Poitier shut the door instantly. This wasn't diva behavior, it was survival. In 1964, Poitier had toured with singer Harry Belafonte in the South, and Klansmen chased their car through back roads, guns flashing. The scars of that night lingered. So when In the Heat of the Night came along, Poitier laid down his condition: I will not sleep one night in Mississippi. The film's star refused to risk being lynched for playing a role about justice. Jewison backed him, shifting production to Sparta, Illinois, a northern town that could double for Mississippi. Still, danger wasn't gone. For a few establishing shots, the crew ventured into Tennessee. Poitier would fly in, shoot, and fly out immediately. He refused to stay overnight, fearing violent retaliation. The result? A film about Southern racism that was mostly crafted outside the South. The irony wasn't lost on Poitier, who later admitted that every time he stepped in front of the camera, he was aware the hatred depicted on screen existed just beyond the frame. What audiences saw as fiction was a reality Poitier was still running from. The infamous slap was revolutionary. It's just a slap, or so it seems. In one explosive moment, wealthy cotton baron Endicott strikes Virgil Tibbs across the face. The audience expects Tibbs to swallow the insult, as Hollywood had always demanded. Instead, Poitier slaps him back. Hard. This wasn't in the original script. MGM executives feared disaster. Southern theater owners warned, if that slap stays, you lose the South. But Poitier stood his ground. He remembered decades of movies where black characters endured abuse in silence. He told Jewison flatly, if he slaps me, I slap him back. Jewison agreed. Cameras rolled and cinema changed. In theaters, black audiences erupted in cheers. White audiences sat stunned, some angry, some enlightened. In Mississippi and Alabama, projectionists cut the scene altogether, terrified of backlash. But the power of that slap rippled far beyond the screen. It shattered a rule of American cinema that black actors couldn't defy white violence. That 1 second of film became a political act, as vital as any protest march. Poitier later called it a cultural slap heard around the world. It wasn't just Tibbs striking back. It was every man denied dignity, every voice forced silent. A single gesture said, no more. Rod Steiger's gum wasn't just gum. Rod Steiger chewed gum like a weapon. Every snap, every slow grind between his teeth gave Chief Gillespie authority, menace, and unpredictability. But here's the secret. It wasn't in the script. On day 3 of filming, Steiger popped gum into his mouth during rehearsal. Norman Jewison noticed the strange rhythm it gave him and told him to keep it. Steiger ran with it. Suddenly, Gillespie wasn't just a blustering sheriff. He was restless, coiled, always one chew away from snapping. Steiger explained later, the gum gave me something. It let me show that Gillespie never relaxes, never stops testing the people around him. The chewing became part of the character's grammar. It filled awkward silences, punctuated insults, and unsettled Tibbs in their exchanges. Sidney Poitier, famously disciplined, sometimes hated it. The smacking and chomping felt sloppy to his precise acting style. But in their friction, authenticity was born. Their scenes crackle because Poitier is measured, Steiger is erratic, and the gum makes Gillespie seem feral and human all at once. When Steiger won the Academy Award for Best Actor, critics pointed to his immersive realism. What they didn't know was that a 5-cent stick of gum had helped rewrite how America saw small-town sheriffs. Not bluster, but bite. Not caricature, but complexity. MGM nearly pulled the plug. In Hollywood boardrooms, In the Heat of the Night looked like a financial mistake, a racially charged film with no action stars. Executives at MGM doubted it would make a dime. They slashed the budget to bare bones. As filming dragged, Jewison begged for extra days. MGM refused. Poitier demanded security escorts and accommodations, safe from racial violence, costs the studio hadn't planned for. Suddenly the film teetered on collapse. At one point, MGM floated the idea of toning down the racial edge. They suggested making Tibbs more deferential to Gillespie, softening the confrontation. Jewison exploded. This film isn't about politeness. It's about America. Burning. He refused to shoot a watered-down version. The crew adapted to survival mode. Sets were reused. Locations doubled up. Long takes replaced expensive coverage. Some nights the cast shot through exhaustion, fueled only by coffee and determination. Ironically, the constraints gave the film its raw edge. The grainy night shots, the stripped dialogue, the claustrophobic close-ups, all born of budget. Cuts made the film feel urgent and dangerous. What MGM nearly buried became a cultural juggernaut, grossing $24 million and sweeping the Oscars. The irony? The studio executives who almost killed the movie later boasted of its success as if they'd believed in it all along. Quincy Jones's score was a revolution. In 1967, film scores sounded like sweeping symphonies, strings, horns, safe melodies. Quincy Jones tore up that rulebook. He wanted grit. He wanted sweat. He wanted the sound of the American South. Jones blended blues, gospel, and juke joint funk, crafting something raw and unprecedented. Then he called Ray Charles. Charles recorded the theme song in a single take, his gravel voice punching through the melody like a preacher at a revival. The result? A soundtrack that didn't just underscore the movie, it announced it. The studio hated it. Executives told Jones, "This is too black, too rough." White audiences won't buy it. Jewison and Poitier fought back, demanding the score stay. They won. When the film premiered, the music stunned critics. Reviewers called it the pulse of racial tension itself. Audiences left humming the theme, its defiance echoing long after credits rolled. For Jones, the victory was personal. He became one of the first black composers to break Hollywood's musical color line, opening doors for generations after him. The score wasn't background, it was backbone. Not violins in ivory halls, but guitars in smoky bars. Not polite symphony, but America's fractured soul, sung loud enough to be heard in every theater seat. The heat wasn't just in the title. Filming in Sparta, Illinois during the summer of 1966 wasn't a convenience. It was punishment. Temperatures soared over 100 degrees, humidity clung like a second skin, and the cast wore heavy suits designed for Mississippi's conservative style. The sweat pouring off Sidney Poitier and Rod Steiger wasn't makeup. It was real exhaustion. Jewison leaned into it. He refused to air-condition the set, telling the crew, "This story is about heat. Heat of racism, heat of conflict. Let them feel it." By midday, actors dripped through their costumes, shirts sticking, tempers flaring. Steiger joked later, "You didn't have to act irritable. The weather did it for you." The brutal heat shaped the film's atmosphere. Gillespie's sweat-stained collar and Tibbs's shining forehead weren't accidents. They were part of the authenticity. The heat became another character, suffocating everyone, ratcheting up tension, until it boiled over. For Poitier, the weather symbolized the emotional climate. It wasn't just hot, he said, it was oppressive. It mirrored the hostility in the story. What audiences saw was realism at its finest. What the crew endured was near heat stroke. In the end, the title wasn't metaphor. It was prophecy. Norman Jewison wasn't the first choice. Hollywood didn't see Norman Jewison as the obvious. Pick a Canadian director with a background in comedies like The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming. He was hardly a natural fit for a brutal, racially charged drama. MGM initially courted Robert Mulligan, famous for To Kill a Mockingbird. But scheduling conflicts and nerves about handling such a politically explosive story forced Mulligan out. Jewison was next in line. The gamble raised eyebrows. Could a white Canadian capture America's racial crisis? Jewison's outsider status became his advantage. He approached the script with fresh anger, telling the cast, "I'm looking at America as a foreigner, and what I see is madness." He relied heavily on Poitier, listening to his instincts, adjusting dialogue, and fighting for authenticity. Poitier later said Jewison's humility made the difference. He didn't pretend to know, he asked. And he listened to Jewison's bold decisions, shooting in oppressive heat, keeping confrontations raw, demanding truth over comfort, transformed the film. His direction earned him an Oscar nomination and launched him into the ranks of serious American filmmakers, not the expected choice, but the right one. Sometimes the outsider sees the cracks more clearly than those who live inside the walls. A murder mystery, without a murderer. Audiences remember In the Heat of the Night for its atmosphere, its racial tension, and that unforgettable slap. But what's often overlooked is how unusual the story is as a murder mystery. The killer isn't revealed until the very end, and when he is, it feels almost secondary. This wasn't an accident. Jewison deliberately downplayed the whodunit structure. He cared less about catching the killer than about showing how two men, one black, one white, were forced to work together in a climate of hate. The murder was the excuse, Jewison said. The real crime was America itself. To some studio executives, this was madness. They wanted a neat detective story. Jewison refused. He slowed down the pacing, let confrontations linger, and allowed the investigation to become a mirror for race relations. The gamble paid off. Critics praised the film for redefining the police procedural, calling it a murder mystery where the body on the ground isn't the only corpse. The corpse is American civility. Not just about who killed, but about who was killing the country. That narrative choice lifted the film from genre flick to cultural landmark. The ending was a quiet revolution. Most 1960s films dealing with race ended with compromise, apology, or tragedy. Jewison chose something different. In the final scene, as Tibbs boards the train, Gillespie picks up his bag and helps him. It's a small gesture, wordless, human. Jewison fought for that ending. MGM wanted something more dramatic, an apology speech or handshake. Jewison resisted. A speech is fake. A gesture is real, he said. By letting Gillespie carry Tibbs's bag, he gave the audience something subtler, respect earned, not given. Rod Steiger later explained that the moment wasn't just scripted, it was felt. By the end, Gillespie didn't love Tibbs, but he respected him. And that was enough. Audiences sensed the weight. For many black viewers, that tiny act of recognition was more powerful than any sermon. It showed that change, however small, was possible. Not fireworks, but flickers, not reconciliation, but acknowledgement. Sometimes cinema changes the world not with shouts, but with silences. The Oscars made history. In the Heat of the Night stormed the 1968 Academy Awards, winning 5 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Actor for Rod Steiger. But the victories came amid one of America's most volatile years. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated just days after the ceremony. For many, the timing was almost unbearable. Here was a film about racial tension being honored by Hollywood, while cities outside burned in grief and anger. Sidney Poitier, notably, wasn't nominated despite carrying the film. Many believed racism played a role. Still, the night marked progress. Jewison recalled, "When the Academy chose us, it chose to face America's reality." The win was a symbolic crack in Hollywood's facade, forcing the industry to admit that social issues could no longer be ignored. Go ahead and like and subscribe, because this is where cinema meets history. And we still have 2 more jaw-dropping facts, plus a bonus that will show you just how dangerous and revolutionary this movie truly was. Sidney Poitier lived in constant fear. Even though most of the film was shot in Illinois, Sidney Poitier never let his guard down. The racial climate of 1967 was too volatile. In Tennessee, where some exteriors were filmed, he was so fearful of attacks that he refused to stay overnight. Instead, he flew in, filmed, and left the same day. Crew members remembered his tension. Poitier would pace between takes, watching shadows, always alert. His bodyguard sometimes stood just outside the set. He later admitted, "I lived with the sense that something could happen at any moment." That fear seeped into his performance. When Tibbs scans rooms with suspicion, when he stiffens under hostile stares, those weren't rehearsed mannerisms. They were lived reality. Jewison encouraged him to use that energy, telling him, "Don't hide it. Let it burn through the lens." What audiences saw as controlled fury was rooted in genuine anxiety. Poitier wasn't just playing a detective fighting racism. He was a man surviving racism while the cameras rolled. That overlap between role and reality gave Tibbs his unforgettable power. Not just acting, but endurance. Not just fiction, but truth. The film sparked boycotts in the South. When In the Heat of the Night premiered, critics hailed it as groundbreaking, but not everyone welcomed it. In the Deep South, theater owners faced threats for showing it. Some refused to screen the movie at all. Others cut key scenes, including the infamous slap, before projecting it. Southern newspapers called it divisive propaganda. Local officials accused MGM of stirring racial unrest. Yet, despite the boycotts, the film drew packed houses in northern cities. In Chicago, Detroit, and New York, black audiences lined up around blocks, hungry to see Virgil Tibbs strike back against systemic abuse. Jewison recalled, "The South rejected it, but America as a whole embraced it." Ironically, the controversy fueled the film's success. Headlines about bans only drove more people to see it elsewhere. By year's end, In the Heat of the Night had become one of the highest-grossing films of 1967, proving that Hollywood could take risks on difficult subjects and still win big. Not silence, but uproar. Not retreat, but revolution. The South tried to bury it, but the rest of America made sure it lived. The slap wasn't rehearsed. Here's the twist. That iconic slap, the one that changed Hollywood, it wasn't rehearsed. Norman Jewison kept it spontaneous. He instructed Larry Gates, playing Endicott, to deliver his slap naturally. Poitier, fully aware, prepared himself to strike back with equal force. When the cameras rolled, the shock on Gates's face wasn't acting. It was genuine. He had never been hit on camera before, and certainly not by a black actor, in 1967. Jewison later said, "We wanted truth. We got it." The sound of Poitier's hand echoed through the set, stunning the crew into silence. Everyone knew they had captured lightning in a bottle. That unscripted electricity bled into theaters. Audiences felt the authenticity, the sting, the refusal to bow. It wasn't choreography. It was history being filmed in real time. Not staged, but raw. Not performance, but defiance. That slap wasn't just cinema. It was America, changing frame by frame. In the Heat of the Night was more than a murder mystery. It was a battlefield disguised as a movie set. What emerged was art that confronted America's ugliest truths and demanded dignity on screen. If you enjoyed uncovering these wild secrets, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Remember, cinema doesn't just entertain. Sometimes it rewrites history.